Good morning, everybody. Just Wanda this morning. We're keeping everybody in prayers. Lots of viruses are going around this time of year, and with all the rain and everything else in the air, it's not helping. But we're continuing the lesson of Matthew chapter 23, and we are starting in verse 11 of Matthew chapter 23, and it reads, "But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted." The lesson writer writes, normally people estimate greatness by how many people serve and honor them. Jesus reminded his followers that in his kingdom it should be different, and that we should estimate greatness by how we serve and honor others. In a word, like all their successors in spirit to the present day, they were severe to others, but very indulgent to themselves. This is speaking of the Pharisees. Since Jesus truly was the greatest among them, he spoke of himself as a servant. It is unfortunate that many of the followers of Jesus imitate the leadership philosophy and style of the scribes and Pharisees more than the style of Jesus. The promise is absolutely true in regards to whosoever shall exalt himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself shall be exalted. But sometimes is only known in the measure of eternity. In other words, that there's a lot of people who go out and do really good things, but no one ever notices them. People always notice the big stuff, like somebody donating $1 million, but that one person who goes and fixes food for the homeless, or brings, knits, little scarves and stuff to help, keep people warm in the winter. They may not get a lot of credit here, but, if they're a born-again Christian, they'll receive glory in heaven. So we're not always going to receive the rewards we think we should down here. The 8 woes to the religious leaders. These woes stand in contrast to the 8 beatitudes of Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 through 11. Jesus spoke harshly here, yet this was not the language of personal irritation, but of divine warning and condemnation. Such series of woes are familiar from the Old Testament prophets, where the tone is often of condemnation, and that is the emphasis here too. Here comes the woes. In verse 13. "But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye that them that are entering to go in." Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Literally, the word hypocrites refers to an actor, someone playing a part. Jesus exposed the corruption covered by the spiritual image of the scribes and Pharisees. The religious leaders kept people from the kingdom of heaven by making human traditions and human religious rules more important than God's word. This was clearly seen in the way that they opposed and rejected Jesus. If they had opened the kingdom of heaven to men, they would have welcomed and received Jesus as the Messiah and the Son of God. It is written of old that the priest's lips should preserve knowledge. God that committed the key of knowledge to the ministers and guides of his church, not that they should take it away, but that the people might seek the law of their mouths, because they are messengers of the Lord of hosts. In other words, they intentionally withheld things to boost themselves. That God, instead of delivering the compassion and grace of the Lord, they held it for all themselves and just gave condemnation to everybody. So instead of bringing people to the Lord, they turned people away. It is bad for someone not to enter to heaven themselves, but it's far worse to prevent another person from entering in. In ancient times, the rabbins carried a key, which was a symbol or an emblem of knowledge. Now moving on to verse 14. "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation." Using clever and dishonest dealings, the scribes and Pharisees stole the widows' homes, careful to cover it up in the name of good business or stewardship. Their long, falsely spiritual prayers are used to build a spiritual image, often for the sake of big donations. See, crooked people will always use the ministry to make money. And that's exactly what they're doing. They are making themselves rich by abusing their office. He respected not the arithmetic of our prayers, how many they are, nor the rhetoric of our prayers, how eloquent they are, nor the music of our prayers, the sweetness of our voice, nor the logic of our prayers, or the method of them. But the divinity of our prayers is that which he so much esteemeth. In other words, God doesn't care if you're really poetic in your prayers. You can quote this, quote that, and you can just make it sound like music. What he cares about is the heart. Why are you praying? The greatness of their sin demanded a greater condemnation than others will endure. Under this concept, we can say that no one will have it good in hell, but we can trust that some will have it worse than others will. Spurgeon would write, "These words prove that there are degrees of punishment, as there are gradations in glory. All the ungodly will be judged and condemned by the righteous judge, but the greater condemnation will be reserved for the hypocrites." Moving on to verse 15. "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte. But when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves." Their zeal in evangelism did not prove that they were right with God. These religious leaders went to great lengths to win others, but they brought people to darkness, not light. Paul had the same idea in Romans chapter 10, verse 2, where he observed that some of the Jewish people of his day had a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. The word proselyte in an English transliteration of a Greek word, preselutos, which means one who is approached or drawn near. The proselyte was the full convert who had accepted a ceremonial law and circumcision, and one who had become, in the fullest sense, a Jew. In other words, they were making people like themselves versus making people like the Lord. A sizable body of scholarships convincingly argues that the 1st century AD till the full fall of Jerusalem marks the most remarkable period of Jewish missionary zeal and corresponding success. When he is one, you make him twice the son of hell as yourselves. Through their great energy they could win some, but to no lasting good to those who were won. Their business was not to turn men from sin unto God, but merely to convert them to an opinion. Which is exactly what I just said, is that instead of bringing people to the Lord, they just made them like themselves. And that didn't do any good. People need to know the Lord, not to know you itself. In this respect, the religious leaders were similar to Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses today. They were courageous, energetic messengers, but with a false message. Jesus did not criticize the missionaries' extensive missionaries effort, but its results. They out-Pharisaied the Pharisees. Moving on to verse 16. "Woe unto you, ye blind guides, which say, Whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools are blind, ye fools and blind. For whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? And whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing. But whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whosoever shall swear by the altar sweareth by it, and all things thereon. Whosoever shall swear by the temple sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. And he that shall swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon." Our obedience to God's word, out of obedience to God's word, they refused to swear by the name of God. Yet they constructed an elaborate system of oaths, some of which were binding and some were not. It was a way of making a promise while keeping fingers crossed behind one's back. In other words, they taught that don't swear by God, but you can swear by this, you can swear by that. In other words, it made these promises mean nothing. You know, it's like someone who tells you, they make a promise to you, all well knowing that they don't have any intention of keeping it. To the Jew, an oath was absolutely binding, so long as it was a binding oath. Broadly speaking, a binding oath was an oath which definitely and without equivocation employed the name of God. Such an oath must be kept, no matter what the cost. Any other oath might be legitimately broken. Here Jesus emphasized that the altar itself is greater than the sacrifice made upon it. The altar is the established meeting place between God and man. And our altar is Jesus himself and his work on the cross. Having never been separated from God the Father by sin, Jesus himself needed no altar. He had a free and glorious relationship with his Father. It was the freedom of Adam before the fall, or even more so, because Jesus had a history of relationship with his Father that even Adam did not know. It is worthy to think of the greatest of the Old Testament altar. Of the greatness of the Old Testament altar. The purpose of the altar is significant. It sanctified what was put on it, and it sustained and bore the sacrifice until it was consumed. The location of the altar is significant. It shows that we can come to Jesus and his atoning work first. The shape of the altar is significant. It is square and perfectly proportioned, stable and unshakable. The horns of the altar are significant. They show the power of God inherent in Jesus. The position of the altar is significant. It is not raised, but is low enough for all to approach. It has no steps that would reveal human flesh. The appearance of the altar is significant. It is smeared with the blood of sacrifice. The material of the altar is significant. It is brass, forged in the fire and able to endure the judgment of the flames. Jesus reminded them that every oath is binding, and God holds the oath maker to account, even if they excuse themselves. That concludes today's lesson.